This is an optional video for you. Just very, very briefly going to talk about the Japanese creation myth, and then just real quick about the Mongolian invasions of Japan. So the creation myth. Like many creation myths, everything starts with a great chaos of nothing or whatever. From this come the first gods, and then eventually two gods who are very important in this myth come about, Izanagi and Izanami. More gods will come, especially from these two, but more gods will come. From these two will come the sun god, and then from the sun god eventually will come somebody who becomes the first emperor. So these two are important for many different reasons. But the story goes something like this. They're out walking on the bridge. They take a spear or a sword, depending on which story you're looking at, stab it into the water to see what's down there. When they pull it up, the stuff that drips off of the point, that creates the land of Japan. So that's kind of the creation myth. Like I said, if you want to read more, I got a much more detailed version online for you. Alright, the Mongolian invasion. There's two of them. The first one happening while the Mongolians were still trying to conquer China. The Mongolians had sent some emissaries into Japan to ask the Japanese people for help. Not because they necessarily wanted the Japanese help or even needed it, but they didn't like the idea of having their back exposed to some people who were friendly with China. So they wanted to protect their backsides, and if they could get Japanese soldiers to die instead of Mongolians, you could kind of see why they'd go that route too. Japan refuses. First of all, they're friends with China. Second of all, they weren't stupid. They knew that once the Mongolians were done with China, in all likelihood, they were going to go after Japan. So while the Mongolians are fighting the Chinese, they send another force. They kind of split their forces, and they go after the Japanese. So this first war, the invading force is not nearly as big as the second one because so many of the troops were occupied in China. There are different estimates on the number of ships, but the more reasonable estimates that you can find in books and online are between 500 and 900 boats. Keep in mind some of these boats are pretty small, others were larger troop transports that could hold the horses and the supplies. And anywhere between 23 and 40,000 soldiers. When the Mongolians get to Japan, they land on the island of Kyushu, and the Japanese really were not ready. So it was a pretty easy conquest for the Mongolians on the island. They had advanced weaponry, gunpowder, projectiles, all sorts of things they borrowed from the Chinese, the Koreans, and then of course the Mongolians were skilled horsemen. In fact, if you look at this piece of art from around the time period, you can see, if you look real close, these projectile explosives as well as other weapons that were being used. So they had this advanced weaponry. They go, they attack, they pillage, they who knows what else, and then at night, they go back to their boats. And it sounds like a good plan, because if you're sleeping on the boats, you're pretty much safe. You don't have to worry about people attacking you while you're sleeping because it's so difficult to get to the boat. Unfortunately, the Mongolians didn't seem to know about hurricane season. While they're sleeping on the boats, a big hurricane comes, the winds, the storms, they smash the boats. Somewhere around 200 ships were sunk. Somewhere around 13,000 soldiers were killed. So the remaining forces turn around and go back to China. Once the Mongolians conquer all of China and they get this big Yuan dynasty going, the Khan sends an even bigger force to go after Japan. This is going to be most of the decent sites and books that I've read say around 4,400 ships. Now that sounds like a lot, but keep in mind the Koreans were put in these really tiny boats and sent. So they weren't all these giant troop transports. I mean, it's still a lot of boats, but you put some perspective there. You know, the painting, like you look down here, all the boats look like they're the same. They weren't. Some of them were glorified fishing boats. Or actual fishing boats. Anyway, there's between 70 and 140,000 soldiers, Korean soldiers, Chinese soldiers, Mongolian soldiers, sent to Japan. But by now, Japan has had years to prepare. They've built walls, they've put up garrisons, they've got a bigger army stationed, and when the Mongolians attack, they're not able to win as easily this time. In fact, they're repelled from Kyushu. While they're on their boats that night, again, it's hurricane season. A big storm comes, smashes a lot of the boats. Thousands of boats are destroyed. Sorry. Upwards of 100,000 soldiers or people are killed, so the remaining Mongolians turn around and go back to China. If it had just been one invasion that was taken out by by this strong wind and storms, it probably wouldn't have been thought of too much. But twice a superior force came to Japan. Twice an invading army comes. And both times from heaven comes this monster wind, this divine wind that smashes the enemy, the superior forces, the superior technology even, and protects the Japanese people. This word, the phrase, divine wind, gets translated in Japanese. It's called kamikaze. Obviously, during World War II, this is going to have a very different meaning, but it's still, I mean, if you think about it, kamikaze, the divine wind striking down at a strong, maybe technology advanced enemy and taking them out. So you can understand where the name comes from. Got any questions? Just send me an email.